Forbidden Door 2026 is coming, and before it does, I decided to go back and watch every single Forbidden Door from the beginning, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. All of them in order back to back. I thought it was going to be straightforward, watch the shows, talk about the great matches, and get hyped for what's coming. It was not straightforward, because the more I watched, the more I started feeling something that I did not expect going into a wrestling retrospective. Every year, AEW opens the Forbidden Door. Every year, it promises that two wrestling worlds can share one stage, that the best wrestlers in the world do not all have to be in the same company for us to watch them face each other. And for 1 year, it produced something that I genuinely think is one of the best wrestling shows I have ever watched. But lately, I've been wondering something. Every year, AEW opens the Forbidden Door, but I've been wondering if anyone from the other side is actually walking through it. That is the question that this video is trying to answer. Quick context for anyone who needs it. Forbidden Door is AEW's annual crossover pay-per-view event with New Japan Pro Wrestling. The idea is genuinely exciting. Two major wrestling companies share one card. Dream matches that could not happen on a regular show basis become possible for one night. The barrier between wrestling universes temporarily disappears for one night. On paper, this is one of the most exciting ideas in modern wrestling. Whether the execution has consistently lived up to that idea is exactly what I spent the last week trying to figure out. June 26th, 2022, the United Center in Chicago. The first Forbidden Door pay-per-view. Watching this back now, 4 years later, knowing where Forbidden Door eventually goes, I was genuinely surprised by one thing. Not the matches, the crowd. In 2022, none of this was guaranteed. Two companies with different audiences, different wrestling styles, different rhythms sharing one card. Would the AEW audience actually care about the New Japan wrestlers? Would the crossover feel forced? Was this concept going to work at all? Looking back now, it seems obvious that it would work. But in 2022, it was not that obvious. What stood out to me was how much the audience was willing to meet the concept halfway. They were not just there for the names they already knew. They were cheering for the Japanese wrestlers. They were reacting to everything. They were in tune with the whole show from the opening match to the main event. Now that might sound like a small thing, but it's actually the whole story of 2022. Because what the crowd did that night was take the risk out of the concept. They proved that wrestling fans were willing to invest in wrestlers from a completely different world, as long as the show gave them a reason to. Orange Cassidy versus Will Ospreay was my favorite match from the show, and watching it back, it feels like the clearest example of what Forbidden Door can be. On paper, this pairing makes no sense. Ospreay moves at speeds that are inhuman, while Cassidy is built around being visibly unbothered by everything. Hands in his pockets, barely trying, half asleep. Those two should not work together, which is exactly why they did. Ospreay taking Orange seriously is what made Orange feel legitimate. Orange reacting to Ospreay's style in such a distinctive way made everything Ospreay did feel even more explosive. The contrast was the match. Funny and athletic, weird and genuinely great. Two completely different wrestling philosophies colliding and both surviving. The Moxley versus Tanahashi main event gave the show a serious spine. Two major wrestlers from different promotions and a proper match with real weight. Certainly not the most spectacular thing on the card, but the right main event for the first edition of anything. Forbidden Door 2022 was an experiment with visible seams. Some parts stronger than others, but it only needed to prove one thing: that the audience would walk through the door with them, and that they did. June 25th, 2023, Toronto, Forbidden Door. If 2022 was AEW and New Japan asking whether this could work, 2023 is the answer. And the answer is not just yes, the answer is that it can produce something that genuinely might be one of the best crossover wrestling cards ever assembled. And I do not say that lightly. The difference between 2022 and 2023 is confidence. In 2022, the show feels exciting because these two worlds are finally sharing a stage. In 2023, it feels like these two companies are no longer just happy to be in the same building. They know exactly what Forbidden Door is supposed to be. The card is much more loaded. The dream match energy is sharper. Both sides feel like they actually showed up to compete. And then there's the final hour of the show. Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay might be my favorite match of all time. I came into it without the full context of their history. I had not watched their Wrestle Kingdom match, no rivalry background, no prior chapter, just 2 wrestlers and a match. And it completely amazed me. Halfway through, I stopped thinking, I stopped taking notes. I just became a fan reacting to what was in front of me. Every near fall, every strike, every expression, all of it felt massive. The match is violent, it is athletic, it is dramatic, it is emotional all at once. It does not just feel like 2 great wrestlers having a great match. It feels like a match that's about something. Ospreay feels like a man who's trying to prove that he belongs at the absolute top. Not just someone who the internet calls as one of the best, but someone who can stand across from Kenny Omega and force the wrestling world to accept it. And Kenny carries all of this mythology into the ring. Everything he represented before AEW existed. So Ospreay fighting him does not feel like a great contest. It feels like 2 eras colliding. When I tell you that this match made Forbidden Door feel worth it as a concept, I mean that without exaggeration. And then the main event was Bryan Danielson versus Kazuchika Okada. That match lands differently, where Omega versus Ospreay was overwhelming and explosive. Okada and Danielson is patient and controlled. 2 all-time great wrestlers trying to solve each other, and Danielson winning feels like a genuine statement. AEW's technical standard bearer beating the Rainmaker on a Forbidden Door stage. Here's the thing I keep coming back to about Forbidden Door 2023. That final hour with Omega versus Ospreay followed immediately by Okada versus Danielson may have been an impossible standard to set. Not because 2024 and 2025 failed, but because 2023 assembled the 2 of the greatest crossover matches in history on the same show, during the hottest period that the concept ever had. What it accidentally created was the benchmark that almost any future wrestling event would struggle to follow. That is not criticism, that is a compliment so large that it becomes a problem. I do want to be honest about one thing. AEW wins a lot on this show. Punk wins, MJF wins, Orange Cassidy retains. On a crossover event, both sides should feel genuinely dangerous. When AEW keeps winning, the visiting wrestlers start feeling like guests rather than threats. That observation matters a lot because it gets louder the further along we're gonna go. But Forbidden Door 2023 as a whole, the final hour alone justifies the entire concept, and because of that, every Forbidden Door after it has had to answer for it. How do you follow that? June 30th, 2024, Elmont, New York. Going into Forbidden Door 2024, I noticed something I did not feel going into the previous 2 shows. I was not automatically excited, which surprised me. I love this concept, but 2022 had the novelty. 2023 had Omega versus Ospreay. By 2024, I could see the shape of the show before it started, the formula underneath the spectacle. An AEW wrestler versus a New Japan wrestler. The AEW wrestler probably wins. Another crossover pairing, the AEW wrestler probably wins. A dream match that delivers in the ring but whose result never feels in doubt. That feeling hung over the early part of the show. MJF versus Hechicero was a fun opener, but it felt inevitable. Danielson versus Shingo was genuinely excellent wrestling. 2 wrestlers who understand physical storytelling at the highest level. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Orange Cassidy was also very good, and Zack Sabre actually winning felt genuinely refreshing. The fact that one result felt refreshing told me something about how the rest had been landing. The TNT ladder match woke me back up. Chaotic, violent, unpredictable. Mark Briscoe in particular, every time he's in a match, you just believe him completely. And then Mercedes Moné versus Stephanie Vaquer happened. This is the match I need to talk about properly because the video I'm making right now would be doing you a disservice if I just called it a great match and moved on. Going in, I knew Mercedes. I knew what she brought, but I genuinely did not know what to expect from Stephanie Vaquer at this level. What I got was a complete performance. Every single thing Stephanie Vaquer did looked real. Not polished, real. Her strikes looked like they landed, her sequences felt like they mattered. Every near fall made me question the result, and I knew the result going in. That is the mark of a genuinely great performance. She walked into the match, and by the time it was over, you knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The chemistry between them was instant. The crowd was completely in it, the pacing was perfect, it did not slow down when it should not have. For the first time across 3 Forbidden Door events, the women's match felt essential. Not just good, not just better than expected, essential. This was the first women's match across any Forbidden Door that belonged in the conversation about what the event had achieved. Not just a side note, but a centerpiece. Going into Ospreay versus Swerve, this was my match of the night. That situation did not survive the night. Swerve versus Ospreay was spectacular in a way I was not ready for. The last 15 minutes were unreal. Near fall after near fall, momentum constantly shifting. Even knowing the result, I still found myself questioning it. That is how good it was. And Naito winning against Moxley did something important. For once, it felt like the New Japan talent had shown up to compete rather than to just participate. Naito winning felt like a reminder of what Forbidden Door is supposed to be. Overall, 2024 was the first time when I genuinely started questioning the concept. Not because the wrestling got worse, but because the formula was now visible. And every time I started doubting it, the show found a match to remind me why opening the Forbidden Door was worth it. Mercedes and Vaquer reminded me, Ospreay and Swerve reminded me, but I noticed that I needed reminding, and that felt like new information. August 24th, 2025, the O2, London. For the first time, Forbidden Door left the United States, the most ambitious setting that the show has ever attempted, and the London crowd was extraordinary from the first entrance. Copeland and Christian teaming up was one of the most purely emotional moments of the whole show. The London crowd, from the second Metalingus hit and not stopping until the match ended, was something that I was not ready for. This was Edge and Christian actually tagging for the first time in what felt like over a decade. Years of teases, years of fans waiting, and it finally happened. And the story in that match, Christian not trusting Adam before they eventually found each other, was exactly right for two people with that much history. MJF versus Hangman was great, bitter, personal, the kind of wrestling match those two consistently produce. Toni Storm versus Athena was fantastic, physical, relentless, never letting up, the lights out. Steel Cage main event had genuine moments. Ospreay's entrance got an incredible reception. Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi, Darby Allin, and Hiroshi Tanahashi sharing a corner is genuinely a dream lineup. The match had insane spots throughout. So why did I finish this show with complicated feelings? Because here's the thing I kept noticing all night. Forbidden Door kept getting bigger and bigger. Bigger stars, more production value, more international, more cultural reach, and 2025 was the most ambitious version logistically. A different continent, the O2 in London, an extraordinary crowd, yet somehow it felt like the least Forbidden Door of all 4 shows. That contradiction is the most interesting thing I took away from this entire retrospective. The most international Forbidden Door was the one that felt least like two worlds genuinely colliding. The show that took the concept furthest was the one that felt like an AEW event with New Japan cameos. The Lights Out Steel Cage main event had 3 New Japan wrestlers in a 10-person match. Story being told was primarily about Moxley versus Ospreay. An AEW story. The New Japan presence was real, but it was not driving the narrative. It was just there. It was not the point. 3 hours into the show, in the middle of a genuinely great wrestling night in London, I had a thought I did not expect. This does not feel like Forbidden Door. Not in the way 2022 did, not in the way 2023 did, not even in the way that 2024 felt when Zack Sabre Jr. or Naito reminded you what the concept was for. This felt like a great AEW pay-per-view with a Forbidden Door logo on it. Here's something I want to say clearly before we get into 2026. The problem with Forbidden Door is not that the wrestling got worse. The matches are still great, the crowd are still hot, production is still strong, the individual talent involved is still extraordinary. The problem is what happens once you experience two worlds truly colliding. Once you have felt Forbidden Door 2023, once you have watched Omega versus Ospreay and felt what the concept looks like at full power, it becomes harder to accept a version that feels like one is just hosting the other. It is not that 2024 and 2025 are bad. It is that you know what the ceiling looks like. And when a show stays comfortably below it, you feel the distance. Forbidden Door works when both sides feel dangerous. When New Japan, CMLL, or Stardom, wrestlers are not just providing rematch atmosphere, but actually threatening to take something home, when results make both worlds feel equal. The bigger Forbidden Door became, the less unique it started feeling. That is the thing which is worth fixing before it defines what Forbidden Door is. Forbidden Door 2026 is coming, and I keep thinking about the question I was asking in the beginning of this video. Every year, AEW opens Forbidden Door, but lately I've been wondering if anyone from the other side is actually walking through it. And after watching all 4 shows back to back, here's my honest answer. Sometimes they do, and when they do, there is nothing in wrestling like it. When both worlds show up with equal stakes, when New Japan wrestlers feel like genuine threats rather than special guests, when the door is actually open in both directions, Forbidden Door becomes the most exciting night on the wrestling calendar. No other show can do what Forbidden Door does when it's fully committed to what it is supposed to be. The problem is not the concept. The problem is when the concept starts believing its own reputation and stops doing the work that earned it. Forbidden Door 2026 does not need to feel like 2023. It does not need another Omega vs. Ospreay, another all-time classic, another final hour that sets an impossible standard. What it needs is to remember that there are still 2 wrestling worlds on either side of the door. When Forbidden Door remembers that, when both sides genuinely show up, when the results can go either way, when you sit down not knowing which side is going to walk away with more, there is no other show in wrestling like it. And that is still worth showing up for. The door is still there. The question is whether both sides are still willing to walk through it. And thank you for watching this, and goodbye.